On this episode of China Uncensored, why Apple is giving in to Chinese censorship. Again. Hi, welcome to China Uncensored. I'm producer Matt Gnaizda, in for Chris Chappell, who's out on a family vacation. I can't wait to see those photos. Shot on iPhone 7. Speaking of which, Apple. It's the world's most valuable company. Its iPhones are hugely popular in China. But on December 23rd, Apple made a move in China that tarnished its international image.
Last month, government authorities asked Apple to remove the English language and Chinese language New York Times apps from its Chinese iTunes store.
Come on. First they removed the headphone jack, and now freedom of speech. Not for everyone, of course, just for 1/5 of the world's population. But this is a huge tragedy for people in China. I mean, how are they going to access important news, like this story about 3 New Yorkers co-parenting a golden doodle? Or this one about how your teenager can help you pick your next multi-million-dollar real estate property. Actually, with all the rich Chinese trying to park their money in US real estate, that second article might actually be kind of useful. Anyway, we could sit around making fun of the New York Times all day, which would actually be kind of fun. But while we've criticized the Times in the past for omitting certain sensitive stories from its China coverage, and even getting a few China stories wrong, it is one of the few major US media companies with reporters in China, and they even publish a Chinese version. Without it, Chinese people lose an important perspective on how the Western world views China. The funny thing is, this isn't even the first time the New York Times has been censored in China. Authorities started blocking the New York Times website back in 2012, after it published an expose on the family of the Chinese Prime Minister. But Chinese censors were technologically unable to block citizens from directly accessing New York Times articles through its iPhone app. Eventually, though, the censors figured it out. Just make Apple do the censoring. An Apple spokesman told the New York Times that it had removed their app because it was in violation of local Chinese regulations. Now, you might be a bit surprised that Apple would bend over backwards for the Chinese authorities like this, considering that last year Apple fought tooth and nail against US authorities to protect user data. That's when the FBI wanted the company to create a backdoor so they could get into a suspect's iPhone. Eventually, Apple won, in the sense that the Justice Department dropped the case, because the FBI figured out how to unlock the iPhone themselves, after being on hold with Apple customer service for 32 days. But in China, a fight with authorities wouldn't just mean an expensive legal battle. It would put Apple's entire multi-billion-dollar future in jeopardy, because the Chinese Communist Party doesn't exactly play fair. For example, Apple is still fighting a ruling that initially banned iPhone 6 sales over a patent infringement claim by a Chinese company so small it doesn't even have a website. So in a country where the legal system is a joke, Apple probably decided it's easier to give in than to fight its way out. And the part Apple didn't tell the public is that it owes the Chinese regime a big favor. You see, Apple and its Chinese manufacturing partner Foxconn took billions of dollars in government subsidies and perks. That's according to this damning piece published in the New York Times 6 days after their app was removed, which is why you shouldn't pick a fight with investigative reporters. Anyway, this isn't even the first time Apple has caved into Chinese censors. In 2013, Apple removed an app from its Chinese App Store that let users get around the Great Firewall of China. They've also, in the past, removed other media apps from their App Store that let Chinese people read uncensored information. The New York Times is just the most high-profile example so far. So what's Apple's motivation for kowtowing to the Chinese Communist Party? This is going to surprise you. Just kidding, it's money. And it's more about sales than just the cheap manufacturing. You see, China is the world's biggest consumer of iPhones. As of a year ago, there were 131 million iPhone users in China compared to just 110 million in the US. But Apple hopes it still has a long ways to go, since that's only 17% of the Chinese smartphone market. Yeah, there's a lot of people in China. So it seems poor Apple has no choice but to do what the Chinese regime tells them, under the excuse of following local regulations, and to hope that keeps the door open for future sales in China. But if Apple thinks the Chinese regime intends to let them continue to be the biggest smartphone retailer in China, they're kidding themselves. Like how eBay went to China in 2004 with big dreams, but left with its tail between its legs after Chinese website Taobao pushed it out of the market. And a decade ago, Google had high hopes to be the primary search engine in China and even agreed to the Chinese regime's censorship requirements initially, only to be pushed out by Chinese search engine Baidu, whose co-founder is a member of the Chinese government's top advisory body. And Microsoft assumed it would keep expanding Windows in China forever, only to see the Chinese government take moves in 2014 to require that Windows 8 be replaced with a Chinese knockoff. And more recently, Uber got taken for a ride when it was suffocated by Chinese government regulation and was forced to sell its China business to a local competitor. And Apple itself has gotten into trouble in China. In addition to the iPhone 6 delay, Apple's own iTunes movies and iBook stores were shut down by government regulators, and Chinese state-run media has targeted the company as well. So Apple already knows that the road in China is going to be dangerous. And Apple's not exactly bulletproof, unlike those Huawei phones. But Apple is still holding on to dreams of a larger market share. The thing is, the Chinese regime almost certainly intends to let homegrown Chinese smartphone makers, like Huawei, rule in the long term. Which means that even if Apple tosses its reputation into the garbage today in exchange for a piece of the Chinese market, in the end, they're still going to get shanghaied. So what do you think? Leave your comments below. Once again, I'm Matt Gnaizda, filling in for Chris Chappell.